If there was ever a moment that proved a man could destroy his entire life in a single step, this was it. Rebecca's water broke in the hospital cafeteria 8 weeks too early, and while nurses rushed toward her, while strangers froze in shock, while pain tore through her body in violent waves, Dr. James Mitchell looked straight at her and kept walking. Not because he didn't recognize her, not because he didn't understand what was happening, but because his arm was wrapped around another woman, and in that moment, his mistress mattered more to him than the wife he had divorced that very morning. The wife carrying his child. The wife he believed was weak, broken, and finally out of his life. What James Mitchell did not know was that Rebecca had spent years letting people underestimate her. He did not know that the woman he called a burden was secretly one of the richest women in the country. He did not know that the hospital his grandfather had founded no longer belonged to his family. And he certainly did not know that the quiet woman he had humiliated, ignored, and betrayed had already purchased the building, secured the evidence, filed the charges, and prepared the collapse of every lie he was living inside. By the time James stepped over Rebecca's wheelchair to get into the elevator with Elena, his fate was already sealed. And before the night was over, he would lose his job, his money, his reputation, his freedom, and any illusion that he had ever been the one in control. 3 hours before Rebecca's water broke, she sat alone in her Honda Civic in the hospital parking garage, staring into the rearview mirror as she watched her husband kiss another woman beside his Mercedes. The divorce papers he had served her that morning sat on the passenger seat. She had already read every line. She had already signed what she needed to sign, and she had already stopped crying over him months ago. The tears had come earlier, half a year ago, when her private investigator first delivered photographs of James and Elena leaving the Riverside Hotel together. She had cried then, alone in her downtown penthouse, in a home James had never seen because he believed she lived in the small apartment she maintained as part of her carefully constructed cover. But that grief had not lasted. Pain had hardened into clarity. Clarity had become strategy, and strategy had become patience. Rebecca had not always been Rebecca Mitchell. Before that, she was Rebecca Montgomery. The Montgomery family had built one of the most powerful pharmaceutical empires in the world over 4 generations. After her parents died in a plane crash, Rebecca inherited a fortune at 21 that most people couldn't comprehend. But she had not wasted it. She had multiplied it. Quietly, ruthlessly, brilliantly. By the time she met James, she had grown her inheritance into a financial empire of her own through investments in medical technology, international supply chains, real estate, and emerging markets. Her wealth gave her access to almost anything, but her grandfather had taught her something money couldn't buy: the power of invisibility. Visible wealth made people perform. Invisible wealth revealed who they really were. So Rebecca learned to dress simply, speak softly, move quietly. She learned to let people make assumptions. She learned that modesty was not weakness. Sometimes it was camouflage. She met James at a charity event hosted by the hospital. He was charming, confident, admired. He spoke passionately about cardiac surgery, underserved patients, and building a legacy larger than himself. He looked like a man devoted to service, a man with ambition, intelligence, and heart. Rebecca believed him. For a while, she truly believed him. But James was not in love with service. He was in love with admiration. And his mother, Patricia Mitchell, saw Rebecca as a threat from the very beginning. Not because Rebecca was loud or difficult, not because she demanded attention or power. Patricia hated her because she could sense something she didn't understand and couldn't dominate. Rebecca was too calm, too unbothered, too self-contained. Patricia mistook that for weakness, and like most cruel people, she attacked what she thought wouldn't fight back. At family dinners, Patricia mocked Rebecca's clothes. She made sly comments about James's former girlfriends, women from good families, with real polish. She implied Rebecca was after James's salary, even though Rebecca had never asked him for money. She criticized the way Rebecca spoke, the way she decorated, the way she carried herself, the way she existed. Every insult was designed to shrink her. Every slight was deliberate. Every performance was meant to remind Rebecca that she would never be considered good enough to be a Mitchell. What Patricia didn't know was that Rebecca documented everything. She kept records, dates, phrases, incidents, witnesses. She never argued when Patricia wanted a reaction. She never defended herself when James stood there and said nothing. She simply wrote it all down. Because Rebecca understood something abusers never do. Cruel people think silence means defeat. Sometimes, silence is evidence. James changed slowly after the wedding, or maybe he simply stopped pretending. The attentive husband became increasingly absent. The man who had once promised to build a life with her chose the hospital, his ego, and his mother's approval over every obligation he had made. He worked long hours when he didn't need to. He forgot anniversaries. He criticized Rebecca's cooking, her timing, her moods, her lack of ambition, while accepting her loyalty like it was his birthright. When Elena arrived as a new surgical nurse, Rebecca noticed the shift almost immediately. James started locking his phone. He became careless in the way arrogant men always do when they think they won't be questioned. He changed his cologne. He stayed late for no clear reason. He smiled at text messages he turned away from her. Rebecca hired a private investigator within 3 weeks. That was how she learned about Elena. Young, ambitious, flattering, and willing to believe James's favorite lie. That he was trapped in a cold marriage to a woman who didn't understand him. The truth was almost laughable. Rebecca understood him better than anyone. That was the problem. She saw the insecurity beneath the confidence, the need for applause beneath the professionalism, the weakness beneath the charm. And once she saw it clearly, she stopped trying to save the marriage and started preparing to survive the ending. 2 months before the divorce papers arrived, Rebecca acquired St. Anthony's Memorial Hospital through Montgomery Holdings. Officially, it was a strategic investment in a struggling healthcare institution with historic value and long-term potential. Unofficially, it was also the place where James had built his ego, his identity, and his illusion of untouchability. Now, it belonged to her. She never announced it publicly at first. Only a few executives knew, a few lawyers, a few administrators, and Dr. Raymond Chen. Everything was timed carefully. By the morning James filed for divorce, Rebecca had already secured the hospital purchase, transferred key authority, frozen legal vulnerabilities, and assembled enough documentation to destroy him in family court, civil court, and professional review. She did not act because he cheated. She did not act because he wanted out. She acted because he stole from her, lied under oath, manipulated finances, and believed he could abandon responsibility without consequence. And she acted because she was pregnant with a daughter who would one day ask what kind of man her father had been. Rebecca intended to have the answer ready that afternoon in the parking garage, She watched James kiss Elena beside the Mercedes she had bought him the year before. He had never asked how she could afford such generosity on such a modest lifestyle. He simply accepted it. Entitlement rarely asks questions when it is receiving benefits. Her daughter kicked hard beneath her ribs. Rebecca placed a hand on her stomach and whispered, "I know, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. Better than okay." On the dashboard sat a large manila envelope. Inside were ownership transfer documents, termination papers, financial evidence, fraud reports, and one final truth James had not yet seen. A truth that would wound him more deeply than the loss of status. But that revelation could wait. First, she needed to get through her ultrasound appointment. James had forgotten about it, despite her reminder that morning. She stepped out of the Honda, smoothed her inexpensive maternity dress, and walked into the hospital without looking back. The cafeteria seemed quiet enough for her to wait a few minutes before going upstairs. She bought a bottle of water she didn't really want. Then the first contraction hit. It came hard and sudden, like a truck striking her from the inside. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. At first, she tried to breathe through it. Then another wave came, sharper, lower, dangerous. And moments later, she felt it. That unmistakable warm rush no pregnant woman forgets. Her water had broken. 8 weeks early. In the middle of a crowded hospital cafeteria. Someone shouted for labor and delivery. Chairs scraped across the floor. A cashier named Maria rushed from behind the register. 2 nurses from another wing arrived almost immediately, and within seconds Rebecca was in a wheelchair being pushed toward the elevators, while contractions intensified with terrifying speed. She was in pain, but pain was not the worst part. The worst part was seeing James step out of the staff elevator at that exact moment. Elena was with him, her lipstick still faintly smeared on his collar. His hand pressed possessively at her waist. Rebecca looked at him, and he looked at her. Across that polished hospital floor, for one suspended second, there was no confusion in his face. He saw the wheelchair. He saw her distress. He saw the nurse's urgency. He saw exactly what was happening. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Then Elena said something to him under her breath, and she laughed. And James's expression changed. It became cold, annoyed, dismissive. That familiar look Rebecca had come to know over the last year. The look that said her needs were inconvenient, her pain was exhausting, her humanity was interrupting his priorities. Instead of moving toward her, he adjusted his path. He stepped around the wheelchair. One foot lifted high enough to clear the wheel, and without a word, he kept walking. A doctor, a husband, a father-to-be, stepping over his wife while she went into premature labor, as if she were an obstacle in the hallway instead of a human being in medical distress, as if she were something beneath him. And from the second-floor balcony above the cafeteria, Patricia Mitchell appeared with her phone already raised, recording everything. Rebecca heard her laugh. Not nervous laughter, not shocked laughter, delighted laughter. The kind that comes from someone who believes she is witnessing a victory. Patricia narrated Rebecca's pain into her camera like it was entertainment. Like humiliation was a family event worth saving and sharing. Rebecca could see her lips moving, could see the glee on her face, could see the satisfaction of a woman who truly believed that this was the moment Rebecca had finally been broken. A nurse leaned down urgently. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need to get you upstairs right now. Your baby is coming too early." But Rebecca could barely hear her at first. Because in that moment, watching her husband disappear toward the exit with his mistress, while his mother filmed her suffering from above, something inside her went still. Not shattered, not panicked. Still. The last small piece of hope she had been carrying. The tiny, irrational hope that James might yet prove himself capable of decency when it truly mattered, died right there on the cafeteria floor. He was not confused. He was not manipulated. He was not misunderstood. He was exactly who he had chosen to be. Rebecca steadied her voice. "Take me upstairs." Then she added, "But first, contact Dr. Raymond Chen in administration. Tell him Rebecca Montgomery needs him immediately. Use my full name." The nurses exchanged startled looks. They knew her as Rebecca Mitchell. But Dorothy, the senior nurse who had worked at St. Anthony's for decades, froze. "Montgomery," she repeated carefully. "As in Montgomery Holdings?" Rebecca nodded through another contraction. "Yes, I'm the new owner. Dr. Chen knows. And Dorothy, I need every detail of what just happened documented. Who was present? What Dr. Mitchell did? What Patricia Mitchell filmed? Everything. Can you do that?" Dorothy's expression changed in an instant. Confusion gave way to comprehension. Comprehension became outrage. "Oh, honey," she said, gripping Rebecca's hand. "Yes, I absolutely can." Then she turned into a force of nature. She ordered incident reports, witness statements, labor and delivery preparation, Dr. Sarah Kim for premature labor management, security alerts, administrative notification, legal documentation. By the time the elevator doors closed, the machine had already begun turning. Rebecca looked up just once and saw Patricia still filming, still texting, still smiling. She almost laughed, because Patricia had no idea that what she had just recorded would not humiliate Rebecca. It would bury James, and possibly herself. Inside the elevator, Rebecca pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from her legal team. A message from David Rodriguez, her lead attorney. "Documents are ready. Just say when." Rebecca typed back with shaking fingers. "Now, deploy everything." Another contraction tore through her, and she closed her eyes, breathing through the pain, focusing on one thought only. Justice was already moving. By the time Rebecca reached labor and delivery, James's collapse had begun. David texted again. "Termination notice delivered. Fraud charges filed. Emergency custody motion submitted. Asset freeze initiated on all joint accounts. Press statement on new hospital ownership releasing shortly." Rebecca handed her phone to Dorothy. "If Patricia Mitchell or Elena Vasquez try to come up here, call security. Neither is approved." Dorothy squeezed her hand. "You focus on your baby." As doctors and nurses surrounded her, Rebecca felt an almost surreal calm beneath the pain. James had abandoned her inside the very institution where he had built his name. But it was no longer his world. It was hers. And unlike him, she intended to use power responsibly. Across town, James sat in an expensive restaurant with Elena, celebrating what he called his Liberation Day. There was champagne on the table, condo brochures, and the smug carelessness of a man convinced he had escaped consequences. Elena was talking about Bali, about paint colors, about furniture, about the beautiful new life they would build now that he was finally free of Rebecca. His phone buzzed. He ignored it at first, then it buzzed again, and again. Finally, irritated, he checked the screen. The first email came from Human Resources. Urgent. Immediate termination and facility ban. James frowned and opened it, certain it had to be some ridiculous administrative mistake. It wasn't. Effective immediately, his employment at St. Anthony's Memorial Hospital was terminated for cause. Security had been notified. His credentials were deactivated. He was banned from the property, pending investigation into professional misconduct, patient abandonment, and creation of a hostile work environment. The action had been authorized by the hospital's new owner, Montgomery Holdings. He read it twice, then 3 times. The words didn't change. His stomach dropped into open air. Elena leaned closer. "What is it?" James didn't answer because more notifications were flooding in. A bank alert, an attorney email, a notice from the state medical board, a communication from family court, a letter from the district attorney's office, and then one from Patricia with the subject line, "Did you know?" His hands started shaking. He opened his mother's email first. Her message was frantic in a way he had never seen before. Hospital investigators were accusing her of embezzlement from the Mitchell Family Foundation. Lawyers were telling her the evidence was overwhelming, and then the line that seemed to split reality open. "They say Rebecca owns the hospital now. They say she's Rebecca Montgomery. The Montgomery family. Billions. James, did you marry a billionaire and not know it?" The restaurant around him seemed to tilt. His ears filled with static. He stared at the screen as if disbelief itself could change the facts. Elena grabbed the phone from him and read over his shoulder, her face losing color with every sentence. James opened his browser and typed Rebecca Montgomery. Search results filled the screen. Photos from charity galas, articles on healthcare investment, images of Rebecca in tailored black gowns, standing beside senators, CEOs, and global health leaders. Then the Forbes cover. The Quiet Billionaire, How Rebecca Montgomery Turned Inheritance into Empire. It had been published before he even met her. There she was, unmistakably the same woman, only styled differently, carrying herself with the calm reserve of someone who had never needed to prove anything to anyone. His wife. The woman he had mocked in private. The woman his mother had bullied for years. The woman he had just divorced. The woman whose wheelchair he had stepped over a few hours earlier while she was in premature labor with his child. James felt sick. He scrolled through the article like a condemned man reading his own sentence. Rebecca Montgomery had inherited billions young and multiplied them through disciplined investments in medical infrastructure, pharmaceutical logistics, and global development. She maintained a remarkably low profile. She rarely gave interviews. She preferred modest presentation, strategic philanthropy, and quiet influence over public spectacle. A quote from the interview stared back at him. "Real power doesn't need to announce itself. Visible wealth makes you a target. Invisible wealth makes you effective." James whispered, "Oh my God." Not in awe, in horror. Because all at once he saw it. She had never been beneath him. He had simply never been important enough for her to perform wealth around. Elena kept reading. "This can't be right. She drove a Civic. She wore cheap clothes. She never—" James finished the thought for her. "She let us think what we wanted." Then another email came through, this one from his attorney. The message was blunt. Charges had been filed. The unauthorized withdrawals from the joint account, money he had drained believing Rebecca couldn't challenge him, had been documented. The account had been funded entirely by her assets. His divorce disclosures contained false claims. The financial abuse case was strong. The custody filing was stronger. And the incident at the hospital, supported by witness statements and video, was career-ending and potentially criminal. "We need to discuss plea options," the attorney wrote. Plea options. James stared at those words with the detached confusion of a man whose life had shattered so quickly he had not yet caught up to the sound of it. He remembered stepping over the wheelchair. He remembered seeing Rebecca's face. At the time, he had justified it. She was dramatic. The staff would help her. He was done with the marriage anyway. None of it mattered. Now it mattered more than anything, because what he had done was no longer a private cruelty hidden inside marriage. It was evidence. Elena rose slowly from her chair and reached for her purse. James looked up. "What are you doing?" "I should go." He stared at her. "You're leaving?" She hesitated, but not out of guilt, out of calculation. "This is bigger than I thought. If there are criminal charges, if the medical board is involved, I can't be associated with this." "You said you loved me." Elena's face hardened with almost casual coldness. "That was when you were a respected surgeon with money and status, not an unemployed man facing fraud charges." Then she delivered the final cut. "And honestly, if your wife was worth billions and you never knew, maybe you're not as smart as I thought." She walked out and left him with the bill. James sat there alone while the notifications kept coming, each one stripping away another layer of the identity he had built. His hospital access was gone. His accounts were frozen. His colleagues had heard. The board had heard. The press release was out. Rebecca Montgomery, through Montgomery Holdings, had acquired St. Anthony's Memorial Hospital as part of a long-term initiative to restore community-centered healthcare leadership. The hospital he had believed would always belong to his family now belonged to the woman he had treated like disposable baggage. Then came the email from Rebecca. It was short, controlled, and devastating. She told him she had not acted out of cruelty. She had acted because he abandoned a pregnant woman in medical distress, his wife, carrying his child, and in doing so, revealed exactly who he was. She reminded him that he stepped over her wheelchair, that his mother filmed her suffering, that Elena helped him steal from her. They had all mistaken humility for helplessness, kindness for weakness, and silence for ignorance. She told him she had given him years to prove that her first doubts about his character were wrong. Instead, he proved they had not been harsh enough. She told him the hospital his grandfather built with integrity would now be restored by someone who actually understood the meaning of the word. And she told him something that would echo inside him for months. "I don't hate you, James. I pity you. You had everything that mattered, and you traded it for everything that doesn't. Goodbye." He remained in that restaurant for hours after reading it. He didn't drink the champagne. He didn't answer most of the calls. He simply sat in the ruins of his own choices, while the life he had been so sure of dissolved piece by piece. His mother was under investigation. Elena was gone. His job was gone. His access to his child was already being challenged. And the woman he had believed needed him had turned out to be a force so far beyond him that his arrogance now looked pathetic, even to himself. The worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't the status. It was the realization that Rebecca had actually loved him once. She had loved him enough to wait, enough to hope, enough to give him chance after chance to become better than what he was choosing. And he had thrown that love away for vanity flattery, and the cheap thrill of power over someone he thought could not fight back. 6 weeks later, James stood outside St. Anthony's Memorial Hospital, holding a letter that his attorney had warned him not to deliver. By then, his Mercedes had been repossessed. His condo was in foreclosure. His medical license was suspended pending further proceedings. Elena had blocked his number. Patricia was effectively ruined, facing charges, house arrest, and social exile. James was living in a small studio his brother had grudgingly helped him rent, working low-paid consulting assignments to survive. And Rebecca had given birth. A little girl. Premature, but healthy. He had not met her. The emergency custody order had been granted quickly after the judge reviewed the footage, the financial records, the witness statements, and the documented pattern of abuse. James had spent those 6 weeks in shock at first, then shame, then something more painful than either: understanding. He read everything he could about Rebecca. He learned about the hospitals she had funded anonymously, the child health programs she had supported in multiple states, the international supply initiatives she had built to reduce medication shortages in underserved regions, the interviews she had declined, the credit she had avoided taking. She had been extraordinary all along, and he had treated her like she was lucky to be chosen by him. The letter in his hand had been rewritten 37 times. The first versions were terrible, defensive, self-pitying, full of explanations disguised as remorse, full of wounded pride and fear of consequences. By the 37th, he had finally managed to say what an apology actually requires. I did this. I chose this. There is no excuse. He didn't expect forgiveness. He didn't even expect a response. He only knew that living without saying it felt even more cowardly than everything that had brought him there. A security guard met him outside the property line. James explained he was not trying to violate the order. He only wanted the letter delivered if Rebecca was willing to receive it. Then he waited. The autumn wind cut through his jacket. Staff came and went. Some recognized him and looked away. Others didn't know who he was, but they could see what failure looked like standing in daylight. After nearly an hour, Dorothy came outside. James straightened immediately. Is Rebecca? She's upstairs with your daughter, Dorothy said. Her name is Lillian Mitchell. The name hit him harder than he expected. Rebecca had kept Mitchell for Lily, not out of loyalty to him, out of her own dignity, her own choice. Dorothy studied him for a moment, then handed him an envelope. She read your letter, Dorothy said. James swallowed. She did? All 37 versions. His face burned. I didn't know she could. There's a lot you didn't know, Dorothy replied. Then her tone softened slightly. She said the first 36 were apologies for getting caught. The 37th was the first one that actually took responsibility. That's why she answered. James stared at the envelope like it might contain either salvation or execution. She asked me to tell you something, Dorothy said. Accountability is the first step. Only the first step. Therapy, restitution, sobriety, service. Those are the minimum. If you ever want a chance to meet Lily, you'll need to become someone worthy of being her father. Not someone who shares her DNA. Someone worthy. He looked up helplessly. Do you think there's any chance? Dorothy gave him the kind of answer that only people who have watched human beings break and rebuild for decades know how to give. Rebecca believes people can change if they truly want to. But she also knows most people don't want to badly enough. Then she left him there with the envelope. James walked to the nearby park,
The same one where he had proposed years earlier, back when he still believed being in love was enough to make him a good man. He sat on a bench, opened Rebecca's letter, and began to read. She told him she had read every version. She told him only the last one sounded like a man who had finally stopped performing and started telling the truth. Then she made one thing painfully clear. She had not destroyed his life. He had. He destroyed it when he chose cruelty over kindness, when he chose status over substance, when he chose his mother's approval over his wife's dignity, when he stole money, lied under oath, and abandoned a woman in medical distress. She had not framed him. She had documented him. She told him she never revealed her wealth because she wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she had. She wanted a partner who would choose her when she appeared to have nothing. Instead, she found a husband who believed he was doing her a favor by staying married to her. A man who let his mother humiliate her. A man who stole from her while calling her a burden. Then came the line that cut deepest of all. The cruelest part wasn't the affair, she wrote. Affairs happen when people are cowards. The cruelest part was watching you become smaller and meaner over time. Watching you choose pettiness when you could have chosen growth. James had to stop reading for a moment because the truth of it was unbearable. She went on. You can't make someone become who you hoped they were. You can only accept who they really are and decide whether they deserve space in your life. Then she told him he did not deserve space in her life. Not as he was. But Lily deserved the chance to know her father, if he could become someone safe, accountable, and genuinely changed. Then came the offer. Not forgiveness, not reunion, not co-parenting. An opportunity. He was to complete every court-ordered requirement, attend serious therapy with a specialist in narcissistic patterns and emotional abuse.
Stay sober. Maintain honest employment for at least a year. Make full financial restitution. Do the internal work of understanding who he had become and why. After 2 years, if he did all of it consistently, with documented proof and genuine progress, Rebecca would consider discussing supervised visitation. Not because he deserved it, because Lily might. And then the conditions became even sharper. If he violated boundaries, contacted her outside approved channels, manipulated the press, sought sympathy, performed rehabilitation instead of living it, or made any move that suggested he still saw accountability as a stage rather than a transformation, the offer would disappear permanently. At the end, she wrote something he would never forget. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Lily. The man I married had potential. The man who stepped over my wheelchair destroyed that man. I'm offering you the chance to build someone new from the rubble. He read the letter 3 times. By the final page, the sun was setting behind the hospital. Some men, when they lose everything, become more bitter. Others are forced for the first time to meet themselves without titles, applause, excuses, or camouflage. Sitting on that bench with Rebecca's words in his hands, James realized that for years he had confused being admired with being good. He had thought credentials were character. He had thought charm was integrity. He had thought having power meant he deserved obedience, patience, forgiveness, and endless second chances. Now, all of it was gone. And what remained was the truth. A woman he had stepped over had been standing taller than him the entire time. She had more money, yes. More power, certainly. But that wasn't what defeated him. What defeated him was her discipline, her patience, her refusal to let abuse define her, her willingness to move in silence until consequences were unavoidable. James folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then he made the first real choice he had made in years. Not to beg, not to defend himself, not to fight the consequences, to do the work. Whether Rebecca ever allowed him near Lily or not, whether redemption was possible or not, whether the world ever respected him again or not, he would do the work. Because for the first time, he understood that becoming better was not something you said. It was something you proved in private. He pulled out his phone and called the first therapist on the list Rebecca had attached. When the office answered, he scheduled an intake appointment. Then he sat there a little longer in the fading light, listening to the city move around him, feeling the weight of everything he had destroyed and the faint outline of the man he might one day become if he stopped running from the truth. Inside the hospital, Rebecca held Lily against her chest. Her daughter was small but strong, warm and alive, and perfect in the way only babies can be. Rebecca looked down at her and thought about everything that had happened, about love mistaken for weakness, about silence mistaken for surrender, about cruelty mistaken for power. She had not won because she was richer than James. She had won because she had never needed to humiliate someone to feel important. She had never needed an audience for her strength. She had never needed noise to prove her power. People like Patricia believed mockery was dominance. People like Elena believed proximity to status was security. People like James believed they were untouchable, for as long as others tolerated them. But life has a way of revealing character at the exact moment consequences are born. James revealed his when he stepped over a woman in labor. Rebecca revealed hers when she rose anyway. She kissed Lily's forehead and closed her eyes for a moment. Her daughter would grow up knowing that self-respect mattered more than appearances, that patience was not passivity, that kindness should never be confused with weakness, that power did not need to announce itself in order to be real, and that when someone shows you exactly who they are, the strongest thing you can do is believe them, then act accordingly. Outside, the hospital lights glowed against the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond those walls, James was beginning the long and humiliating process of facing himself. Inside, Rebecca was no longer surviving. She was building a safer life, a stronger legacy, a future untouched by the people who had tried to break her. And the final truth James would carry for the rest of his life was this: Rebecca had never been the woman he left behind. She was the woman who had already outgrown him long before he realized he was losing her. By the time he stepped over that wheelchair, he thought he was walking toward freedom. In reality, he was walking straight into the consequences of everything he had chosen to become. And Rebecca? She had been standing the whole time. He was just too blind to see it.